So, as of now, this little sack of human garbage has injured 3 people, including himself, with an improvised explosive. More specifically, a pipe bomb that ultimately didn't work out very relatively well for him because it detonated not exactly as it should have, leaving mainly him with the brunt of the injuries, which I do believe is poetic fucking justice, and I have no sympathy for the little cunt, shit-stained garbage, fucking floater in the toilet at all. Now, I could go on a tirade about how the media is fumbling over themselves trying to avoid calling it an act of terrorism. Actually, New York authorities called it, and this is verbatim, attempted terrorist attack. No, you fucking mentally vacant shit stains. This is terrorism. Terrorism, as defined by the Webster Dictionary, and pretty much everywhere the fuck else, is a surprise attack involving deliberate use of violence against civilians in the hope of attaining political or religious aims. And the question might arise, what is his political or religious aim? Well, I point to this, where Washington Post states that the attacker was inspired by ISIS. And to further reinforce this point, I point to this. Now, I'm not one for jumping to conclusions. However, I'm going out on a limb and say that this man had at least political aims, perhaps religious, seeing as he clearly states he did this in response to Israeli actions in Gaza. And also, as I will discuss later, claimed to be acting against the U.S.'s attacks on ISIS. But on to another matter that really pisses me off is this little tidbit seen here. Now, anyone that has spent any extensive amount of time in the U.S. dealing with taxes is aware that income tax is pretty tight, to the point that the IRS is almost militant about getting their money as they view it, but that's a subject for another time. So how the fuck is where this man works, and therefore by extension where the bomb was made, not known? This raises red flags for me in a number of ways. Firstly, is he paying income tax then? Secondly, if he was allowed to make this at work, who does he work with? Did anybody know about it? And thirdly, just maybe they don't want to let any possible cohorts know that they're onto them. But if that's the case, why bring it up at all? So with those 3 things out of the way, another thing I would like to point out is if he was allowed to make this at work, where the fuck does this guy work? It seems like something that should be very high on the priority list, of the things that they have pinned up on the walls for police officers, FBI agents, CIA, government officials regarding law in general. When somebody does something like this, you need to talk to their family members, their coworkers, especially if the device used was made at work. But moving on. Everything about that little segment just reeks to me for numerous reasons. Also, there's this little headline. You can find it in the New York Times, with one of the first paragraphs to come into view stating that he targeted the spot, in particular for its Christmas themes, and that it is in retaliation to U.S. airstrikes on ISIS, as I mentioned before, which just opens up a whole other can of worms. And the worm on top being, with the festivities coming up in the holidays, New Year's, in the U.S. and by a greater extent the Western world in general, will these kinds of attacks become more prolific? Once again, giving what would seem to be an air of urgency about this, given this time frame that this has happened. But not dwelling on that any longer as to avoid the severe drop in the faith of humanity. Well, mine's in the toilet, so it can't sink much lower. Let's move on. Taking a look at his immigration, he came to the U.S. under the F-43 section of immigration. So, essentially, he came here as a family member, basically a child, of somebody that is F-43, or, in other words, a brother or sister of a current U.S. citizen, and this individual had to be at least 21 years of age at the time of getting the F-41. Now, Ula, or Allah, however to pronounce his fucking name, is 27. So he came here when he was 21. Obviously, his parents aren't 21. They're obviously older. Now, with simple math, you can conclude that he came... Oh, excuse me, I just covered that. Assuming that his parent is related to the current U.S. citizen, that individual is older, there's another question I have in this whole debacle. Is where and how did he get radicalized? Who did it? What drove him now, after 6 years, to decide to do this? It's not something you just wake up out of the blue one day and he's like, hey, I'm going to go attempt a pipe bomb someplace because I disagree with what's happening overseas. Obviously, there's tons of questions, as you'd expect, being so close to the event, but these questions still need to be asked, and the answers still need to be found. The reality is, this situation could have been far worse. And that should open people's eyes, or at least one would hope. But alas, this is humanity. We're not necessarily known for being collectively intelligent. As a person, we are smart. As people, we are dumb, panicky, and reactionary. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. I realize I've been slacking lately, but if you aren't aware, I have been sick, and I probably still sound sick. And I just recently got my voice back. So, with that being said, I'll be back to my usual schedule this week, barring this cold of mine flaring up again. So, if you feel so compelled, leave a like, subscribe, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, and or night. Condolences to New York City and the Port Authority and the victims thereof, except the disgusting little waste of fucking just organic matter that caused the whole situation to begin with. But the other two individuals that were injured, send your thoughts, prayers, however you choose to deal with the situation. That said, I'll see you cunts tomorrow.